Chapter 4. The Royal Road to Rome. The whole history of the Holy Roman Empire is a panorama of human barbarity, murder, and war. It is an excellent representation of the depths to which mortal man can fall, yet all the time professing a religion. The Roman Empire combined all the lust, greed, avarice, and bloodshed that any of the savage nations ever devised, yet they claimed to be acting according to the will of their gods. Apparently it had not changed much by the 16th century, as Martin Luther said, "If there is a hell, Rome is built over it." Evidently, the Roman Empire lost its political and economic power in the world, but certainly not its influence. Today many nations show the evidence of Roman laws, customs, and the wicked practices of that empire. For over 1,000 years Roman history reads like a repetitious soap opera, with all the villainy and wicked practices that script writers could devise. For a millennium, the Romans conquered, burned, robbed, butchered, and murdered their enemies, and oftentimes each other. Their political system was always involved in some kind of conspiracy or assassination. Every election was just another arena, and the politicians who survived the sword, poison, or strangulation had a good chance at winning the candidacy. Every man was for himself. It is a wonder that the empire survived for a fraction of the time it did, with such emperors as Caesar, Cato, Caligula, Nero, and Constantine. Occasionally an honest man came along and made an attempt to help improve the empire. But this sort of man was more feared than the plague. Once there was an honest man by the name of Tiberius Gracchus, who tried to pass a law to redistribute the land that had been stolen from the poor. They clubbed him to death on the Senate floor. That should have been a lesson for the meek and humble, but poor Gracchus's brother made the same mistake and tried to pass similar laws. They also ushered him into the local cemetery. An honest man had no respect in Rome. So it went on and on and on. Thus, the Roman emperors were a strange lot. They worshipped many different kinds of gods, and a few thought they themselves were gods. A few brief biographies are presented in this chapter to portray the beliefs and religion of Rome. Julius Caesar. Among those involved in the Roman clearinghouse operations was a man called Julius Caesar. History lauds him as a great leader and warrior, but he really had qualities that made him great in the eyes of only the Romans. Julius Caesar came into top leadership of the Roman Empire during the rise of two other men, Crassus and Pompey. Crassus was a shrewd real estate man, who did more buying than selling, which soon gave him both power and wealth. Pompey was chief in command of the army, so he basked in Rome's victorious image, along with the booty of many countries. Crassus and Pompey both wanted the empire. Even though they were friends, they eventually became enemies. Pompey had just ravaged Spain, Africa, Armenia, Palestine, Syria, Arabia, Phoenicia, and some countries in the Orient. When he returned, he brought back over $40 million in loot, earning him high respect from the Romans. Rome hailed Crassus and Pompey as their greatest nobility, but only one could occupy the highest seat in the government. Another battle was about to begin, but this time not on the battlefields, it would be in the halls of Rome. Julius Caesar could see not only the conflict of power but also a strategic move that could place himself in a position to achieve the Roman Empire for himself. Through this personal ambition, he convinced Crassus and Pompey that all three should establish a triple leadership and divide the whole world among themselves. It was agreed upon, and thus the first triumvirate of the empire was established. Crassus died in battle, trying to protect and add to his great domain. This, of course, was not bad news to Caesar nor Pompey. Rather, it was good news since it meant they had just inherited another huge fortune. Things were going so well that each looked forward to the other one's dying. Caesar finally came to the position in life that he had always hoped for, the fulfillment of his personal ambition to see how much territory a man could conquer in a lifetime. He began earnestly in this self-appointed bloodletting mission, and instigated the Great Gallic Wars by marching through Spain, France, and then sailing to Britain. From here, he waded through Belgium, Germany, and a few other nations. For 10 years, he added to his honor of plundering, destroying, and killing. He had taken 300 states, 800 cities, killed more than 1 million men and captured 2 more million. To the Romans, he was a magnificent hero, and unfortunately historians haven't changed that image very much. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Caesar's good friend Pompey was becoming a not-so-good friend. He was exalting himself and damning Caesar. Caesar heard the message and was naturally a little disappointed. He decided that Rome also needed a little touch of the blade to show them who really had power and authority. So Caesar and his soldiers marched to Rome with sharp and dedicated swords. This was new news for Rome. When Caesar arrived, he learned that Pompey, the consuls, most of the senators, and many others had fled, and Rome was like a deserted ship. This was Caesar's easiest victory, and he pronounced himself dictator. If anyone disagreed, they could join their ancestors. Caesar chased Pompey to Greece and then to Egypt. But when he arrived in Egypt, his good friends greeted him with the head of Pompey on the end of a pole. Caesar was delighted. Such fine and loyal associates were difficult to find. While in Egypt, Caesar met another interesting friend by the name of Cleopatra. Although he was a bald-headed, 54-year-old epileptic, and she was only 21, it was love at first sight, at least for him. Caesar had been classed as the cleverest politician in Rome, but she was the cleverest woman in the world. She invited Caesar for a moonlight ride up the Nile on her floating palace, which cast a spell over this great Roman hero. He got what he wanted out of the trip, and she got what she wanted. She became Queen of Egypt, and when it was discovered she was pregnant, he decided to return to Rome, with the promise of sending for her later, of course. Word came back that the empire was still going through internal revolutions and enemy attacks. Caesar wanted to recapture his fame and name, so he set out to eliminate all enemies. Victories followed, and he sent word back to Rome: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. When he arrived in Rome, he made the public announcement that he would spend the next 10 years as their dictator. Things were going smoothly for Caesar, so he sent for his good friend, Queen Cleopatra. When she arrived, she carried a baby son called Caesarion, Little Caesar. But Big Caesar placed the queen in a palace across the Tiber. He somehow forgot to tell her that he already had a wife, Calpurnia. Julius Caesar was a religious man, well, that is, he worshipped himself. As he interpreted the Holy Empire system, none of the Roman gods were above wonderful Julius, and to prove it, Caesar had a temple built in his honor and 2 statues made in his image. He appointed a priest to pray and to offer sacrifices to him. He proclaimed that an oath taken in the name of Caesar was as sacred as an oath taken in the name of Jove. He passed a law to have his portrait carried in the gladiatorial processions together with the portraits of the other gods. The Parade of the Sword and the Cross, by Henry Thomas, page 33. This was too much even for the Romans. They didn't mind his massacres, rapes, and murders, but when he began to act with divinity, they gagged. In fact, they decided to gag him, or even better, give him a sword with the sharp end first. His building a golden throne and parading around with a jeweled crown was the final straw that broke the back of Caesar's kingdom. But there were other conspiracies brewing on the empire's horizon. In Spain, 2 of Pompey's sons were stirring up a revolt against Caesar. When this news reached Caesar, he immediately set out to nip it in the bud. He recruited another army and marched off to put down the revolt and to kill the 2 boys, which he did. Because of the way in which Caesar exulted in these things, they were beginning to be repulsive to most of the Romans. He planned to have a grand public celebration in his honor of killing Gnaeus and Sextus, the 2 sons of Pompey. It was a spectacle, and as one historian said, an inexcusable display of vulgarity. Caesar acted like a savage gloating over his kill. This, also, was too much for the barbaric Romans. Caesar had the belief that a god could do no wrong. Then he proclaimed March 15, 44 BC, as the day he would be crowned king of all the provinces around Rome. But there were too many friends of Pompey, too many enemies of Caesar, and too many others who wanted someone else in the kingship. When Caesar walked onto the Senate floor to receive his golden crown, he received an iron dagger instead. It is recorded that 23 dagger wounds ended the life of another Roman god. From among those most involved in this bloody conspiracy was Brutus, whom Caesar trusted and believed was his own illegitimate son. Cato. The Emperor Cato was an unusual person. He was a master of saying one thing and doing another. If Judas could be remembered as a betrayer, then Cato should be remembered as a hypocrite. He was always preaching justice, but was inhuman to slaves. He spoke against vice, but was still immoral at the age of 80. He was opposed to extortion, but practiced it on a massive scale, and he lashed out at others for wickedness, but he himself was among the worst. Cato was a soldier first and foremost, and he delighted in bloodshed. The best war to him was the bloodiest. He bragged of demolishing some Spanish city each day in his war with Spain. Battle to him meant killing every man, woman, and child as quickly as possible. Cato never forgot the Roman defeats from the Carthaginians. So whenever he had the chance to speak to the Roman Senate, he would conclude with the words, "It is therefore my opinion, gentlemen, that Carthage ought to be destroyed." When nothing seemed to progress in that direction, he secretly stirred up a war with Carthage. But the Carthaginians offered peace, and when they discovered the two culprits who started the conflict, they turned them over to the Romans. But Cato would not allow the matter to be settled that way, so he demanded 300 of their young men to serve as slaves on the Roman ships. The Carthaginians gave them reluctantly to save their city. But then the Romans demanded that they give up all their arms. Once again, they submitted and gave up all the war machinery to Rome. Was there anything else? They asked Rome. Yes, they replied, Carthage must be destroyed. The ambassadors from Carthage begged for a little time to gather their belongings together in final preparation for its destruction. The consuls of Rome put on a great display of tolerance and kindness in allowing them that privilege. Days later the Romans marched to Carthage with preparations to destroy the city. To their surprise, the gate to the city was closed and the people refused to open it. This meant war, but the Carthaginians chose to defend their city to the death rather than surrender to such barbaric tyrants. Men, women, and children had been working day and night preparing weapons of war. Even the women had cut their hair to make rope for catapults. They would make a defense that should be remembered more than the Roman Empire. The Romans came against Carthage with all their might, but it took 3 years for them to break down the gate to the city. Then it took 17 days to slaughter all the men, women, and children. 500,000 people died in that city rather than submit to the barbarians from Rome. The Romans were so angry that they tore down every wall, and every building was burned or destroyed. The ashes of the city were 6 feet deep. Nothing of Carthage was left remaining. It was a typical victory for the Romans. The Roman armies rejoiced and returned to Rome to bear the good tidings to Cato. After all, it was his dream. But the gods cheated Cato of his great desire. He died before learning of the fate of Carthage. Caligula. Caligula was nicknamed Little Boot as a child, but finally renamed Gaius Caesar in 12 AD by his Roman colleagues. For 7 months after his accession to power, he was very sick. Some say that it affected his mind, for as soon as he became well, he began a reign of terror and trials, intimidations, and executions. Men were accused of treason for the smallest details. He even killed the man who thought enough of him to put him on the throne as emperor. He not only plundered other countries, but implemented extortion, taxation, and confiscation of property of his own citizens. He literally squandered vast sums of money from the treasury, making his subjects wonder about his sanity. When he was attending the plunder of Gaul, France, he was frequently found by the shoreline picking up seashells and saying that they were the spoils of war. Caligula was another emperor that ruled with the same religious and legal traditions of the Romans. He was able to crowd into his short 4-year reign more cruelty, barbaric murders, and killing than most of the other emperors did in their much longer reigns. This man killed for pleasure, not for necessity. Long lines of prisoners were marched into the arenas for wild beasts to feed upon. At his private banquets he would have men tortured or killed for the entertainment of his guests. One of his particular pleasures was to see men's heads cut off with a single slice of a sword. His final declaration was that he was partly divine, even though he was the only one who could see it. Caligula said he was in constant communication with the god Jupiter. He would walk around with his head tipped so he could receive messages from Jupiter or one of the other gods. He once made the announcement that the moon was his wife and that one of his horses was her priest. Obviously, the man was insane, which was not too unusual for Roman emperors. Among his abnormalities was an extravagant affection for his sister. Another was his desire to place his own statue in the Temple of Jerusalem. Someone talked him out of it, but he still held his personal esteem just as high. When his hobby became spilling the blood of his own citizens, the Romans feared that their own might be used for his pleasure. The time had arrived for a new leader. Different conspiracies were attempted, and finally one succeeded in deposing the little man, who thought he was so big, at the age of 40. Nero. Out of the bloody pages of Roman history, none of the emperors ranked so low on the scale of humanity as did the madman called Nero. He was born in 37 AD, only 4 years after the crucifixion of Christ. When his mother became Empress of Rome, she became the 4th wife of the Emperor Claudius, who had divorced his first 2 wives and killed the 3rd. Understandably, she was concerned about her own fate, so to ensure her place and station, she poisoned her husband. With the exit of Claudius, his son Britannicus stood in line to inherit the throne, but not if Nero could help it. So Nero poisoned him. It has been written that Nero was the worthy son of a worthy mother. With their ability to wipe out competitors, they were bound to excel in Rome's political mechanism. But Nero began to take more interest in the liquor bottle than he did in the government. He left the functions of government for his mother, as he preferred to revel and party with his friends. His favorite hangout was the local tavern, and he would drink until he could stand up no longer. He and his friends would dress up like hoodlums for excitement. Once Nero was nearly beaten to death by a senator, whose wife he had attacked. As history has proved, however, Rome was safer while he played the part of a thug than when he assumed the role of emperor. But his mother wanted him to have broader fields of view than the inside of the local saloon, so she began to groom him for politics. Nero got married, but that's about all it was, for he completely neglected her because of his interest in a slave girl. Mother was very upset with Nero, and in the true spirit of Rome, they began to fight. For her own safety and sanity she left. Then came Poppaea, the wife of Nero's best friend. The historian Tacitus wrote that this woman possessed everything but an honest mind. When she saw the chance to be Empress of Rome, there was nothing she wouldn't do to accomplish it, including murder. She was Nero's kind of woman. But there were 3 obstacles that stood in the way of Poppaea's becoming Queen of Rome: her husband, Nero's wife, and Nero's mother. She easily got rid of her husband with a divorce. Then she plotted against Nero's wife by telling him to divorce her. But when she realized that his wife could still be a danger, something else had to be devised. Poppaea told Nero that his wife was plotting a conspiracy against him. He believed her since that was a common thing in Rome. He ordered his henchmen to find and kill her. Under Poppaea's supervision, the deed was accomplished while Nero's wife was taking a bath. They strangled her, cut off her head, and sent it to Poppaea as a present. Undoubtedly, this pleased Poppaea, and she checked off 2 of her intermediate goals. Now came the 3rd, Nero's mother. Poppaea began to hint, then strongly suggest to Nero that his mother was involved in a plot against him. Since the Roman emperors always suspected such things, Nero was gullible for this one, too, even if it did involve his mother. He listened attentively to Poppaea's plan to his mother. He thought it was a good one and acted on it immediately. Nero sent for his mother, Agrippina, and asked her to meet him at the summer resort of Baiae. Upon meeting, Nero was weeping for joy to see her again, at least it so appeared to his mother. Nero prepared a banquet for her, and as a perfect host, he flattered her with attention. He even made arrangements for her to take a luxury ship back home, which she did. But Agrippina didn't know that it was not supposed to reach shore. A trapdoor was opened when the ship was out to sea, and it sank according to plan. Everything worked perfectly except that Agrippina was an excellent swimmer and was picked up by some passing fishermen. Nero awaited the good news of his mother's death, but bad news came. She was fine and back home. Nero was heartbroken. Next time he would do a better job. He sent out word that his mother was involved in a conspiracy, and she was condemned to death. An armed force was sent out to put down the rebellion. This time he received the kind of news he wanted: his mother had been clubbed to death. Nero and Poppaea were married, but in the tradition of the Romans, it was neither a happy nor a long union, at least not for Poppaea. For when she was heavy with child, Nero kicked her in the stomach and she died. Poor Poppaea. She had tried so diligently to be a queen, but was killed by the monster she created. All the previous emperors were inferior to Nero, at least that is the way Nero saw it. Other emperors implied that they were divine beings, equal to the gods. Not Nero. He considered himself greater than the gods. A crucial quality these emperors lacked was humility. Nero thought he could do anything. He was convinced that he was a master singer. He hired 5,000 people on one occasion to applaud his singing. When he tried to reach high notes, he would literally shake, but the sounds were worse. The audience would burst out in uncontrollable laughter, even though they knew it could mean a death sentence. The laughter subsided as Nero continued singing for hours on end. There was nothing they could do but stay until they were released. Among the other talents of this mortal deity was that of dancing. His instructor tried to help him but became discouraged at his lack of ability, so Nero had him killed. For one of Nero's performances, he decided to dance in the nude. He wanted to show the audience that he had the body of Hercules. However, everyone else saw a thick short neck, a narrow chest, an enormous pot belly, and two spindly legs. His friends carefully but dangerously persuaded him not to dance without clothes again, as the world was not ready for it yet. Then came the art of writing. Nero was going to embark on a 400-volume history of the Roman Empire. However, it never materialized. How else could Nero display his talents to the public? This was a problem for Nero. Then it happened. Fire broke out in Rome, and for 6 days and 7 nights it burned. Nero dressed up in a spectacular costume and went to the top balcony of the palace with a flute in his hand. He played, sang, and rejoiced as the city burned to the ground. However, most of the populace didn't see anything to rejoice about. So blame more than praise reached his ears. If it would have been praise, he would have accepted it, but since there was blame, he put it on the Christians. They were routed out from everywhere, and Nero put his genius to work again. These people were now going to see how great he was, so he thought. He invited all of Rome to come to his circus. The Christians were mounted on poles surrounding the Colosseum, then covered with tar and wax. At a given signal, they were all ignited with fire, while Nero came charging into the arena in a gold and ivory chariot. He was followed by a wild train of nymphs and bacchantes. The spectators broke into a shout of joyous frenzy. Nero bowed to right and to left, and then galloped away over the golden sands under the floodlight of the burning Christians. He was elated with his masterpiece. He had turned the darkness of the night into a poem of living fire. Nobody on earth or in heaven had ever before conceived so stupendous a work of art. He was the supreme poet among gods and men. Parade of the Sword and the Cross, Henry Thomas, page 47. But Nero believed that his talent shouldn't stop there. Next he prepared a long list of people, enemies, suspects, friends, those he disliked or didn't need, anyone that had something he wanted, all were on the list. It was an order for them to commit suicide, for the sake of Nero and good of the state. Unfortunately, everyone on the list disagreed with him. In fact, it was the last great talent that he would ever display to the world. Other people began to realize that the man might include them on his next list. So a few angered people turned into a mob, and the mob turned into an army. They, too, wanted blood, Nero's. News came to Nero of his next great manifestation, his own death. Fear, grief and misery now came upon him, and next it would be the army. He ran like a fox with hounds after it. He hid in the house of one of his servants. All night he lay in terror, knowing that the army was searching for him. Then in the morning he could hear the footsteps of the soldiers marching towards the house. His friends suggested that he commit suicide to avoid the fate of the soldiers. He didn't have the courage, so with the aid of a servant, they took a dagger and placed it against his chest. "What an artist the world is losing today," he shouted, and the dagger plunged into his heart. He had the applause of many Romans while he lived, but perhaps more applauded his death. Certainly no one wept. Here lay Nero in his own blood, a man who had perhaps killed more men than any emperor before or after him. Yet he lived to be only 30 years old, and that was too long. Constantine. Constantine came to rule the Roman Empire in 313 AD in the usual way of winning the ballot, obliterating all competition, but it was no glory seat because the empire was going through a constant series of revolutions and wars, not including the perpetual family problems. During numerous losing battles, Constantine became desperate. He had prayed to all the numerous Roman gods, but he just kept losing battles. His mother was a Christian, so he thought he would try appealing to that deity as a last resort. He won the next battle and was ecstatic about this new war god. He therefore decided that Christ would be the newest addition to the Roman gods. As he was marching to battle, he claimed he saw a cross in the sky, inscribed with the words, "By this sign thou shalt conquer." Whether he saw it or not, no one really knows, but this is how Christ, the Prince of Peace, became the war god of the Roman Empire. Constantine was proud of his new Roman god. He, therefore, made a public announcement that Christ would be the official god of Rome, and Christianity would be the state religion. The God of Christianity had taken a new role in the lives of men. The Romans had selected Christ to be their God, but Christ had not chosen them to be his people. Constantine became converted to Christianity, but it did not make him a Christian. Even though he professed a belief in Jesus, he murdered his wife, his eldest son, and a nephew. The empire had a new god, but they still had the same old barbaric customs. Their code of ethics remained, only the name was changed to protect the guilty. Constantine was a proud man. He dressed in silk robes and used the scepter and the diadem of the Persian monarchs. He put on wigs of many colors and elaborate robes with golden fringe that trailed behind him. All who came to see him had to prostrate themselves before him. He rebuilt the city of Byzantium and renamed it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. He changed a great deal in Rome, but to do this he had to raise the already excessive taxes, turning most of the people into serfs. The empire then had more internal struggles, this time of a more theological nature. It seemed that the Romans were ready to fight over anything at any time, and now came a controversy so disturbing that it seemed the whole empire would tear each other apart. Constantine wanted to put an end to this problem of religion before he lost this goose with the golden eggs. He called 2,500 clergymen and 318 bishops and asked them to present their beliefs of God, but the discussions were in Greek, a language he did not understand. When one of the enthusiasts became overcome in the heat of debate, he struck another in the face. This language was clear and logical to Constantine, and he could tell who was going to win the argument already. The highly irreverent and disputing array of religionists battled for 2 months before Constantine could put an end to it. Those who disagreed with his final decision would suffer the consequences. At this point, Constantine reorganized the Roman Church as it had never been done before. The spiritual men of the church were put into temporal positions. Bishops became governors, and the offices that were once filled with men of humility, poverty, and service became those of splendor, riches, vanity, costly attire, and fame. Christianity had lost its spirituality, but gained temporally. These men of the cloth were now surrounded and tried with excess material means. Churchmen were more involved in money-making schemes, parading around the country with their leader, and feasting on the luxuries of the kingdom, than in searching for spiritual strength. It is written that the leaders of the church had become rich, powerful, respectable, and corrupt. In the garb of the church, the leaders also began to use the influence of the sword. Christianity began to grow as it never had before, and converts came by the thousands. It was much easier to be a live Christian than a dead disbeliever. Just before his death, Constantine joined the official Christian church. It would seem that he felt his deeds should be cleared by the church before he entered the next life. So after a reign of terror mixed with theology, he died at the age of 64, in 337 AD. Just a little more than 100 years later, the entire Holy Roman Empire collapsed. It couldn't stand the weight of its own corruption. Many gods have been worshipped throughout Roman history. Some of the dominant deities were Jupiter, chief god; Janus, the two-faced sun god and guardian of portals; Saturn, the god of agriculture; Genius, god of production; Mercury, the god of commerce and trade; Apollo, god of manly youth and beauty, music and poetry; Mars, god of war; Vulcan, god of fire; Neptune, god of the sea; and Venus, goddess of love and beauty. Paul, the apostle, even found a statue to the unknown god. However, all of this became so confusing to some of the Roman emperors that they could see more virtue in themselves than in some of these mythical and mysterious characters. It was much easier to worship themselves than 100 different deities. As the Romans conquered other countries, the captive people brought their gods with them. Soon Rome began to include them as well in their collection of strange and mystical deities. Even Christianity itself was included in this massive and confusing religious incorporation. But it turned out to be a two-way street. Rome adopted some of Christianity, and the Christians adopted part of Romanism. The effects and doctrines of this great merger are still evident.